The story begins in the early 1940s, a time when the world was engulfed in a war of unprecedented scale. The Axis powers, led by Nazi Germany, Imperial Japan, and Fascist Italy, believed that their military strategies and industrial capacity would be more than enough to dominate the battlefields of Europe and the Pacific. They had spent years honing their military technology, building formidable tanks, planes, and warships, and meticulously planning their campaigns with precision. Yet there was one factor they had gravely underestimated: the industrial and inventive might of the United States of America. While much of the world was focused on direct combat strategies and territorial gains, America quietly transformed its economy and workforce into a colossal war machine that would eventually reshape the course of history. Factories that once produced mundane civilian goods suddenly roared to life, pumping out airplanes, tanks, and every conceivable type of military hardware at a speed and scale that seemed almost impossible. The Axis powers looked on and scoffed, believing that even if America entered the war, it could never match the well-oiled war apparatus of Germany, Japan, or Italy. They laughed, dismissed, and underestimated the potential that lay in the sprawling cities, factories, and shipyards of the United States. Yet behind this dismissal lay a story of determination, innovation, and sheer human effort that would stun the world and turn the tide of the conflict. In the early stages, American aviation factories were transformed almost overnight. What had once been production lines for commercial airplanes, automobiles, and other consumer goods were retooled to manufacture fighters, bombers, and transport aircraft. Engineers, many of whom had never designed a military plane before, worked tirelessly alongside skilled laborers to understand the demands of war production. The government poured resources into research and development, ensuring that every new design incorporated the latest technologies, from more powerful engines to better aerodynamics and armor. Meanwhile, the workforce expanded rapidly, drawing in men and women from all walks of life. Women, who had previously been largely excluded from industrial labor, became the backbone of these factories. The iconic image of Rosie the Riveter symbolized this remarkable transformation as women operated riveting machines, assembled engines, and performed the intricate work required to produce aircraft that could survive the rigors of combat. It was a massive mobilization, not just of machines and technology, but of human resolve and resilience. Every rivet, every bolt, every panel that was fitted to a plane represented a combined effort of thousands of people working with precision, speed, and unwavering commitment. As these factories ramped up production, the scale of output quickly dwarfed anything the Axis powers had anticipated. Germany, which had prided itself on precision engineering and rapid military expansion, could not fathom the sheer numbers America could produce. Japan, too, focused heavily on its naval power, and its existing aircraft fleet failed to account for the relentless surge of American production. What was initially assumed to be a manageable threat became a tidal wave of planes, capable of not just matching, but overwhelming the enemy in sheer numbers. Every month, thousands of bombers rolled off assembly lines, each one ready to deliver destruction to enemy territories. Fighters and reconnaissance planes, equipped with the latest innovations, patrolled the skies and provided strategic advantages that had previously been unattainable. The scale was unprecedented, and it became increasingly clear that the Axis powers had misjudged not only the industrial capacity of the United States, but also the determination and ingenuity of its people. Behind this massive production effort lay countless stories of individuals whose dedication ensured that the planes reached the front lines. Factory workers endured grueling hours, often working double shifts in conditions that were physically demanding and mentally exhausting. Engineers meticulously inspected every design, every component, ensuring that each aircraft could withstand the pressures of war. Pilots trained relentlessly to master these new planes, learning to maneuver and fight effectively against experienced enemy pilots. The logistics of transporting these planes to Europe and the Pacific were equally complex, requiring coordination between factories, air bases, and ports. Shipyards produced massive transport ships that carried planes in crates or assembled them for immediate deployment upon arrival. The entire system operated like a perfectly synchronized machine, each component dependent on the others, yet all driven by the determination to tip the scales of war in favor of the Allies. The psychological impact on the Axis powers was equally profound. When reports began to surface about the number of planes being produced, disbelief and frustration spread through military command. German generals, who had prided themselves on strategic superiority, could hardly comprehend the scale at which the United States was operating. Japanese officers, already stretched thin across multiple fronts in the Pacific, faced an ever-growing fleet of American planes capable of striking deep into occupied territories. The initial ridicule and underestimation quickly turned into concern and, in some cases, panic. They had assumed that limited American involvement would result in manageable numbers of aircraft, but the reality was staggering. The sheer volume of planes allowed the Allies not only to replace losses rapidly, but also to maintain sustained offensives that gradually eroded Axis control in multiple theaters of war. The story of American aircraft production during this period is also a story of innovation. Factories were designed to maximize efficiency, incorporating assembly line techniques that were refined and adapted specifically for military production. New materials were introduced to improve durability and performance. Propulsion systems became more advanced, allowing planes to fly higher, faster, and with greater maneuverability. Even mundane aspects such as paint and camouflage were engineered to provide tactical advantages. Meanwhile, production management techniques evolved to handle the complexity of thousands of simultaneous operations, ensuring that every plane met stringent quality standards. This relentless pursuit of improvement meant that each wave of aircraft not only matched but often surpassed the capabilities of enemy designs. It was not just about quantity. Quality was equally essential, and America delivered both in unprecedented measure. The human stories behind the planes are equally compelling. Women who had never operated machinery now became experts, forging planes that would determine the outcomes of battles thousands of miles away. Men who had previously been engineers in peacetime industries now applied their skills to military aircraft, sometimes designing features that gave Allied pilots crucial advantages. Young workers, barely out of school, contributed to assembling wings, engines, and fuselages with meticulous attention to detail. The collective effort created a sense of national purpose that transcended individual roles. People felt connected to the larger mission. Every plane completed, every bolt tightened, every engine tested, contributed to the fight for freedom and survival on a global scale. As the war progressed, the results of this industrial and human effort became unmistakable. Allied forces could maintain continuous air superiority in multiple theaters. Bombers carried out strategic missions deep into enemy territory, crippling factories, supply lines, and morale. Fighters dominated the skies, providing crucial support to ground troops and intercepting enemy aircraft before they could inflict damage. The numbers alone were overwhelming. Where Axis strategists had expected limited resistance, they encountered relentless waves of aircraft that seemed inexhaustible. Each plane represented not just a machine, but the culmination of countless hours of labor, planning, and sacrifice. The scale of production, combined with the skill of the pilots, created a synergy that the Axis powers had never anticipated and were ill-prepared to counter. The impact of American aircraft production went beyond immediate combat. It fundamentally altered strategic planning for the Axis powers. Resources that had been allocated to long-term campaigns had to be diverted to counter the ever-growing threat from the skies. Supply lines were stretched to their limits as the need to replace losses and defend against sustained bombing campaigns increased pressure on already strained economies. The psychological toll on soldiers and civilians alike was significant. The realization that the enemy could produce aircraft at an almost limitless rate created fear, uncertainty, and a growing sense of inevitability about the outcome of the war. The confidence that Axis leaders had once possessed eroded, replaced by a dawning awareness that the industrial might of the United States was a decisive factor they had failed to account for. By the mid-war period, the figure of 300,000 planes had become more than just a statistic. It was a symbol of the United States' ability to mobilize, innovate, and sustain a global war effort. Each aircraft was a testament to the nation's determination, a tangible product of coordination between government, industry, and the workforce. The relentless production not only met immediate military needs, but also provided a buffer against unforeseen losses, ensuring that the Allies could continue fighting with sustained momentum. It was a logistical marvel and a strategic masterstroke, demonstrating that industrial capacity could be as decisive as battlefield tactics. The Axis powers had laughed at the Americans initially, dismissing their production capabilities as trivial, yet the appearance of 300,000 planes transformed the entire conflict, proving that underestimating an opponent's industrial and human resources could be catastrophic. The legacy of this period is enduring. The rapid expansion of aircraft production during World War II set benchmarks for manufacturing, logistics, and workforce mobilization. Lessons learned from this effort influenced post-war industry, aviation technology, and military strategy. It also became a testament to the power of collective effort, innovation, and the ability of a nation to rise to unprecedented challenges. The story of how the Axis powers underestimated American aircraft production serves as a powerful reminder that victory in war often depends not just on strategy and bravery on the battlefield, but also on the vision, commitment, and ingenuity displayed behind the lines. As the tide of the war continued to turn, the magnitude of America's industrial output began to assert its influence far beyond the factories themselves. Every new aircraft produced was not just a machine, but a symbol of the relentless effort, innovation, and determination that defined the Allied war effort. The Axis powers had assumed that localized successes and initial victories would be enough to maintain control over Europe and the Pacific, yet they could not have anticipated the sheer scale at which America was mobilizing. Bombers, fighters, and transport planes flowed from assembly lines in numbers that seemed almost mythical to enemy leaders. Strategic planners in Germany and Japan quickly realized that no matter how brilliant their tactics or technologically advanced their existing forces, they faced a logistical nightmare. The Allies could sustain operations at a level that far outstripped the Axis capacity to replace losses or respond to strategic threats. The skies, once dominated by Axis aircraft, were increasingly filled with a growing fleet of American planes, challenging enemy air superiority at every turn. It was a war not only of weapons, but of resources, production, and endurance. The human dimension of this production effort was as remarkable as the machines themselves. Across the United States, factories operated around the clock, with teams of men and women contributing in unprecedented ways. Women, in particular, took on roles that had been unimaginable in pre-war industry. mastering complex machinery, assembling engines, and handling precision tasks that directly affected the performance of aircraft in combat. Their contribution was more than labor. It was a cultural transformation, a demonstration of how necessity could drive innovation in human resources. At the same time, engineers and designers were constantly refining blueprints, responding to feedback from the front lines, and incorporating lessons learned from battles into new aircraft designs. Each new model represented an evolution, a direct answer to the challenges faced by pilots in Europe, North Africa, and the Pacific. The interplay between production, innovation, and frontline experience created a dynamic cycle that ensured the American air fleet was not only vast but increasingly sophisticated with every passing month. The logistical coordination required to deploy these aircraft was staggering. It was not enough to simply produce thousands of planes. Each aircraft had to be transported, assembled if shipped in parts, tested, and then delivered to airfields where they could be deployed immediately. Ports were bustling hubs of activity, with cargo ships carrying crates of parts, engines, and armaments across the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Mechanic teams worked tirelessly to assemble and inspect planes, while pilots trained in tandem to familiarize themselves with the latest modifications. The complexity of this operation required seamless coordination between manufacturers, transport crews, maintenance personnel, and military strategists. Mistakes could mean delays, lost aircraft, or worse, operational failures in combat. Yet, despite the immense scale of the operation, the American system functioned with remarkable efficiency. Every link in the chain, from the factory floor to the runway, was synchronized to maintain an unbroken flow of aircraft to critical theaters of war. As American planes began to dominate the skies, their impact on battlefield strategy became increasingly pronounced. In Europe, bombing campaigns targeted German industrial centers, supply lines, and transportation hubs, severely disrupting the Axis war effort. The presence of a massive fleet of bombers allowed the Allies to conduct sustained operations that would have been impossible without the production surge. Fighter escorts protected these bombers from enemy interceptors, ensuring that the missions could be completed with minimal losses. In the Pacific, transport planes played a crucial role in supplying remote island outposts, moving troops and equipment with a speed and reliability that Japanese planners had not foreseen. Reconnaissance aircraft provided critical intelligence, allowing commanders to anticipate enemy movements and respond proactively. The scale, speed, and adaptability of American aviation gave the Allies a level of operational flexibility that directly challenged Axis assumptions about the conduct and outcome of the war. The psychological impact on both sides of the conflict was profound. For American pilots and ground crews, the growing numbers of aircraft provided a sense of momentum and confidence. Each new plane represented not just a tool of war, but a tangible sign of the nation's commitment and resilience. The knowledge that replacements were always available reduced hesitation and fear, allowing pilots to undertake daring missions and maintain pressure on enemy forces. For the Axis, the effect was the opposite. Reports of American production capacity, often delivered in raw numbers and images of endless lines of aircraft, created anxiety and a creeping sense of inevitability. Strategies that had relied on limiting engagements or achieving localized air superiority were increasingly rendered ineffective. Enemy commanders had to account not only for the immediate threat of American aircraft in the sky, but also for the constant replenishment that made it nearly impossible to achieve a lasting advantage. The Axis powers, which had once underestimated American capabilities, were now confronted with the reality of an opponent whose industrial strength was as formidable as any weapon in the sky. innovation and adaptation continued to define the American effort. Aircraft designs evolved rapidly in response to battlefield realities. Engineers incorporated feedback from pilots who had experienced combat firsthand, leading to improved maneuverability, enhanced armaments, and increased durability. Specialized aircraft were developed for different theaters, taking into account climate, terrain, and enemy tactics. The relentless pace of development meant that the Allies were constantly introducing new capabilities, forcing the Axis to react rather than proactively plan. This dynamic created a continuous cycle in which production, innovation, and deployment reinforced one another, magnifying the effectiveness of each individual aircraft. The result was not just a large air fleet, but a highly adaptive and strategically potent force that could shape the course of engagements across multiple fronts. The American workforce remained the cornerstone of this remarkable achievement. Factories became microcosms of society, drawing in workers from every background and experience level. Veterans of industry trained newcomers, imparting knowledge and ensuring quality standards were maintained despite the speed of production. Safety protocols, efficiency measures, and quality control became essential components of the operation, as the reliability of each plane could determine the success or failure of a mission. The sense of shared purpose, often described as a national crusade, motivated individuals to work tirelessly, often under exhausting conditions, to ensure that every aircraft met the exacting standards demanded by combat. Each person, from the engineer to the assembler to the logistics coordinator, contributed to a system that was greater than the sum of its parts, a testament to the power of coordinated effort in times of extraordinary challenge. As the war continued, the strategic implications of this industrial might became ever clearer. In Europe, the continuous arrival of American aircraft allowed the Allies to sustain pressure on multiple fronts simultaneously. Bombing raids could be conducted regularly without the fear of depleting resources. Fighter coverage ensured air superiority, which in turn protected ground operations and facilitated large-scale offensives. In the Pacific, transport and reconnaissance planes enabled island-hopping campaigns, providing the mobility and intelligence necessary to seize critical positions. The sheer volume of aircraft meant that losses, while still tragic, could be replaced without undermining strategic objectives. What had begun as a numerical advantage became a decisive factor, shaping the planning, execution, and ultimate outcome of campaigns across the globe. The story of these planes is also the story of collaboration between industry, government, and military leadership. Decisions about production priorities, resource allocation, and technological development were made with careful coordination. Factories adjusted to changing demands, quickly switching between different models of aircraft or adapting to new innovations. Military leaders provided feedback and requirements, ensuring that production aligned with operational needs. Government oversight ensured that resources were directed efficiently, balancing the demands of multiple fronts and maintaining the pace of production. The integration of these elements created a system capable of sustaining unprecedented output, while continuously improving the capabilities of the fleet. By the midpoint of the war, the figure of 300,000 aircraft no longer seemed fantastical. It was a reality that shaped strategic thinking on both sides. The Axis powers, which had mocked American industrial capacity early in the conflict, were forced to confront a new reality in which the United States' ability to produce, innovate, and deploy aircraft was a decisive advantage. Every mission flown, every bomber dropped, and every fighter engaged in combat reflected not just tactical decisions, but the underlying power of an industrial and human machine operating at full capacity. The combination of numbers, technological advancement, and relentless determination created a force multiplier that fundamentally altered the course of World War II. As the final stages of the war approached, the impact of America's massive aircraft production was impossible to ignore. The Axis powers, who had once dismissed the United States' industrial might as insignificant, were now facing the full weight of a logistical and technological juggernaut that stretched across continents. The skies over Europe, North Africa, and the Pacific were increasingly dominated by American bombers, fighters, and reconnaissance planes, all meticulously designed, built, and deployed in astonishing numbers. The cumulative effect of this relentless production was not only measurable in the number of missions flown or bombs dropped, but in the strategic and psychological pressure it exerted on Axis leadership and soldiers alike. For every offensive the Axis launched, there was an almost immediate response in the form of American aircraft, a testament to the unmatched combination of scale, speed, and innovation that the Allies had achieved. It was becoming painfully clear to enemy commanders that underestimating the United States was not merely a mistake. It was a catastrophic miscalculation that would shape the outcome of the war. The production of aircraft had far-reaching consequences on the battlefield, creating opportunities for the Allies that the Axis could not adequately counter. In Europe, sustained bombing campaigns disrupted supply lines, destroyed vital infrastructure, and weakened industrial centers that had been the backbone of the German war machine. Factories, rail networks, and energy plants were systematically targeted, with American bombers striking deep into enemy territory on a scale that the Axis had never anticipated. Each mission was supported by fighter escorts, which engaged enemy planes in dogfights, cleared the skies of threats, and ensured that the bombers could complete their objectives. The combination of quantity and quality in American aviation forced the Axis to divert resources from frontline operations to defensive measures, stretching already limited manpower and equipment to the breaking point. Strategic plans that had once relied on the ability to quickly recover from attacks were rendered obsolete, as American aircraft consistently arrived faster, in greater numbers, and with superior technology. In the Pacific, the effect of American aircraft was equally transformative. Island-hopping campaigns, which relied on mobility, intelligence, and supply efficiency, were made possible through a combination of transport planes, fighters, and bombers. Remote Japanese positions, which had previously seemed secure, were suddenly vulnerable to air raids and rapid troop deployment. Reconnaissance aircraft provided critical intelligence, allowing commanders to plan attacks with precision and avoid unnecessary casualties. Fighter planes engaged in combat with Japanese aircraft, challenging air superiority and providing support to naval operations that would otherwise have been extremely risky. The coordination between different types of aircraft, ground troops, and naval forces became a force multiplier, demonstrating the effectiveness of combined arms operations. American aviation was no longer a supporting player in the war. It had become a decisive instrument capable of shaping campaigns and determining outcomes across multiple theaters. The human stories behind these operations continued to inspire awe and admiration. Pilots flew into hostile skies with courage and skill, often relying on the aircraft's design, performance, and technological advantages to survive. Ground crews worked tirelessly to maintain and repair planes, ensuring that missions could continue without interruption. Engineers and designers remained engaged, constantly improving aircraft to meet evolving challenges and counter enemy tactics. Factory workers, many of whom had contributed to the early surge in production, continued their relentless efforts, driven by the knowledge that every plane they built would play a role in protecting freedom and saving lives. The interconnectedness of these efforts, from the factory floor to the battlefield, highlighted the extraordinary coordination, ingenuity, and resilience that defined the American war effort. Every plane in the sky represented a combined effort of thousands of individuals working with determination, skill, and an unwavering commitment to victory. As the Allies gained momentum, the impact of air power on military strategy became more pronounced. Operations that had previously relied heavily on ground assaults or naval engagements could now be executed with the support of massive aerial fleets. Strategic bombing campaigns crippled enemy infrastructure, forced the relocation of troops, and created logistical challenges that the Axis could not overcome. Fighter sweeps and air cover provided critical protection for ground advances, reducing casualties and increasing operational effectiveness. In the Pacific, air superiority allowed for amphibious landings with significantly lower risk, as Japanese positions were softened or neutralized before ground troops even set foot on the beaches. The scale and precision of these operations demonstrated how air power, supported by industrial might, had become central to modern warfare. The Axis powers, who had relied on traditional tactics and underdeveloped production, were forced to confront a new reality. Victory in the 1940s required more than strategy or bravery. It required sustained industrial and technological superiority. The psychological toll on the Axis powers intensified with every passing month. Soldiers and commanders faced an enemy whose resources seemed limitless, whose reinforcements were constant, and whose technological innovations were continually improving. Initial confidence in early victories eroded into frustration, doubt, and fear. Strategic decisions became reactive rather than proactive, as Axis leadership scrambled to counter attacks they had neither anticipated nor prepared for. Morale among troops suffered as they faced increasingly overwhelming odds, not only from sheer numbers, but from aircraft equipped with superior speed, maneuverability, and firepower. The image of countless American planes dominating the skies became a symbol of inevitability, a reminder that the Axis had misjudged the United States' capacity to wage war on a global scale. What had started as an underestimation became a strategic disadvantage from which they could not recover. Meanwhile, American production and deployment of aircraft continued to evolve. New designs incorporated feedback from pilots in combat, resulting in improved maneuverability, enhanced armaments, and greater resilience under fire. Factories adopted innovations to increase efficiency, reduce waste, and accelerate output without sacrificing quality. Training programs ensured that pilots could maximize the advantages of each new aircraft, developing tactics that exploited the design features to their fullest potential. Logistic networks expanded, allowing for rapid deployment to multiple theaters simultaneously. The synergy between production, training, and combat operations created a cycle of constant improvement, ensuring that American air power remained ahead of the Axis both in quantity and capability. Each new plane introduced to the fleet added not only numerical strength, but strategic versatility, reinforcing the Allies' ability to dictate the pace and terms of engagement across continents. The cumulative effect of 300,000 American planes was staggering. It allowed the Allies to maintain sustained offensives, apply pressure on multiple fronts, and respond quickly to emerging threats. Axis forces, despite their experience, technology, and tactical ingenuity, were consistently outmatched in terms of operational capacity. The continuous flow of aircraft ensured that losses could be replaced, missions could be conducted at unprecedented frequency, and strategic initiatives could be pursued with minimal interruption. The industrial output, combined with effective deployment and training, created an operational advantage that was virtually insurmountable. The Axis had underestimated the depth of American commitment, the speed of industrial mobilization, and the ingenuity applied to every phase of the war effort, and the consequences were decisive. At the individual level, the human impact of this production and deployment was profound. Pilots experienced the confidence of knowing their aircraft were reliable, advanced, and consistently reinforced. Ground crews understood that their meticulous work directly influenced the success of missions, the safety of pilots, and the effectiveness of operations. Engineers took pride in seeing their designs tested and proven in combat, often incorporating lessons learned into subsequent models. Factory workers, many of whom had contributed to the massive surge in production from the very beginning, saw tangible results of their efforts as planes left the assembly line and entered active service. The scale of human collaboration was extraordinary, demonstrating how collective effort, skill, and determination could produce outcomes that transformed the course of history. Each plane in the air carried not just bombs or guns, but the labor, ingenuity, and perseverance of countless Americans dedicated to a common goal. The final stages of the conflict highlighted the strategic dominance made possible by American aircraft production. In Europe, continuous bombing campaigns, fighter sweeps, and reconnaissance missions disrupted German supply lines, destroyed industrial centers, and maintained air superiority that was critical to the success of ground operations. In the Pacific, the ability to project air power across vast distances enabled island-hopping campaigns, rapid troop deployments, and effective strikes against Japanese positions. The integration of these aircraft into a broader strategy amplified their impact, allowing the Allies to achieve objectives with precision, efficiency, and devastating effect. The scale and effectiveness of American air power forced the Axis to operate defensively, reacting to initiatives rather than implementing their own strategies. It was a reversal of the early years of the war, a testament to the power of industrial production, innovation, and sustained human effort. By the end of the conflict, the production of 300,000 aircraft stood as a monumental achievement in human history. It was not merely a testament to numbers, but to the ability of a nation to mobilize, innovate, and sustain a global war effort with unprecedented speed and effectiveness. The Axis powers, who had mocked and underestimated the United States, were left grappling with a reality they could neither reverse nor fully counter. American aircraft had transformed the nature of the war, enabling operations that were previously unimaginable and establishing dominance in both the European and Pacific theaters. The story of these planes and the people who built, maintained, and flew them remains one of the most remarkable examples of industrial power, human ingenuity, and the decisive impact of preparation and production in determining the outcome of war.